If you ask me to find you a team that perfectly encapsulates wanting to be average just so they can say they're competitive, I would tell you to look no further than the Washington Wizards franchise over the past 6 years. The Wizards, since the 2017-2018 season, have only finished the regular season with more than 40 wins once, and that would be said 2017-2018 season. And instead of hard resetting the franchise and entering a soft rebuild, heading into the 2022 offseason, the Wizards make the dreadful mistake of giving Bradley Beal one of the worst contracts in NBA history, which for some stupid reason had to include a no trade clause on top of that contract being a 5-year, $251 million extension. The Wizards' decision to continue to build around Bradley Beal would predictably backfire and honestly set their franchise even further back than if they would just decide to suck for 2 seasons. Because although the Wizards would be bad, or maybe mediocre is the better word to describe this Wizards team recently, they would be just good enough where they would land the 8th pick and the 10th pick respectfully in the past 2 draft cycles, and ultimately missing out on high-end, dare I say, generational draft prospects such as Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Paolo Banchero, Chet Holmgren, heck, even Amin Thompson, some Brandon Miller, just to name a few. But however, with all that being said, the Wizards finally made the move and they finally made the decision to trade Bradley Beal ultimately to the Phoenix Suns this offseason. And they are now finally in a rebuild. And it seems as if the Wizards finally have a positive direction going forward. Welcome in everybody to the NBA Front Office Show and into my 2023-2024 NBA preseason power rankings with an in-depth analysis into my number 29th ranked Washington Wizards. I do appreciate you all for tuning in to today's episode. I do apologize for the delay. Was on a bit of a family vacation and the location background wasn't the best, and also I tried to record before vacation and the audio was a little messed up. So wasn't able to get this out while I was gone. So I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Before we get started, please do subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office Show YouTube channel while we embark on our journey to 30,000 subscribers here. Leave a like as well and comment down below. What are your thoughts on this Washington Wizards team? And as always, hit that post notification bell as well so you can stay tuned into this entire series and never miss an episode. It's going to be a ton of fun as we're counting all the way down to my number 1 ranked team in my 2023 power rankings. And this Washington Wizards team is a lot of fun to talk about. I'm really, really excited to actually talk about this Wizard team. So come join me. Let's have a bunch of fun. And let's start this off as always with their key additions and departures. Would you trade away your franchise cornerstone or, the guy you've decided, wrongfully or not to build around for the past 4 years or so? You're obviously going to have a pretty big offseason, and that's where we start off. You trade Bradley Beal. And I think my biggest beef with the Bradley Beal contract is the no trade clause. I somewhat get the money, although I would also argue that there's a certain point where homegrown talent or not, I just decide to let you walk than to, cap my franchise. Like, for example, if a team was able to offer Austin Reeves 4 years, $150 million, I would have said, okay, Austin, love you, go get your bag. I'm not doing that. And they didn't, luckily. One, they couldn't. The most the team could also offer Austin Reeves would be, I want to say it was 4 years, $99.7 million. That's fine. I was actually fairly comfortable with that. 4 years, 150, go ahead, Austin, right? But so for me, 5 years, $251 million, it was kind of absurd money for Bradley Beal in the first place. But I get it. He's going to bring in a bunch of ticket sales or whatever. You're going to be decently competitive. Okay, cool. But eventually, you're going to come to the decision to trade Bradley Beal. So when said decision comes, you want to be sure that you have all options at your disposal. And the Wizards just handcuff themselves by saying, here, Bradley Beal, here's a no trade clause on top of that, when there's only like 4 players in the NBA that even deserve that to begin with. So that's also absurd to me. And when, like I said, it would predictably backfire and the Wizards would ultimately say, you know what, yeah, we should probably trade this Bradley Beal dude, who is probably a top 30 player. I'm a little bit lower on Bradley Beal than I think the general consensus is. But, when you do finally come to your senses and trade Bradley Beal, you are now capping yourself to and limiting yourselves to the team that Bradley Beal wants to go to. And there's only a few teams, and you ultimately have to trade them to the Phoenix Suns, who have nothing to give you. And the first round picks you do get back are all pick swaps. They're not even fully unprotected picks. You get a bunch of second round picks from them. But your best asset ultimately from the Bradley Beal trade would be Chris Paul, because you flip him to be Jordan Poole. So just a complete mishandling of the situation. I guess better late than never. Like, good job coming to your senses now. I guess minor victory lap there. I don't know, but yeah, that was my bigger problem with that deal. You also trade Kristaps Porzingis, who you could make a legitimate case that he's coming off of a career year, larger part because he was able to stay healthy for a good chunk of last season, and he was a top 5 post player last season. We knew Kristaps Porzingis was a unicorn in the sense of he has the pick and pop ability and the ability to shoot from insane distances that only some of the best guards in the NBA can, and maybe like a Karl Anthony Towns. But he now became, in terms of how he graded out, a top 5 post player last season, and he had one of his better defensive seasons, in my opinion. So Boston's got a really good player. You reroute Kristaps to Boston, and it ultimately lands you Tyus Jones, who we'll talk about in a sec. But I'm a fan of Kristaps Porzingis. I really do hope he gets to A, stay healthy in Boston, B, contend for titles in Boston. I hate the Celtics, but I'm a fan of Kristaps, so I hope he gets to play some winning basketball and contribute to winning there in Boston. You do lose Monte Morris, who is just super, super solid, low turnover ratio type of dude that's a good 3-point shooter. He was a big part of that team last year. You got to pair him in the backcourt next to Bradley Beal, but you kind of replace him with a more solid dude in Tyus Jones, who again we'll talk about. You lose Isaiah Todd, who is more so just a developmental guy, super, super raw. Jordan Goodwin got a bunch of minutes. He played over 1,000 minutes last season for Washington. Got a good chunk of their pick and roll ball handler scoring possessions as well. Larger part due to the fact that Bradley Beal only played 50 games last season. So he got a ton of reps. Monte Morris also dealt with some injury stuff as well. Kendrick Nunn, you lose him as well in free agency. He's now playing overseas, or should I say the corpses of Kendrick Nunn. Man, it is just super unfortunate what happened to Kendrick Nunn. He is the 3rd best player on a Miami Heat team, 4th best player on a Miami Heat team that went to the NBA Finals back in the bubble in 2020. He gets a taxpayer level contract from the Lakers offseason of 2021. And then he has a bone bruise in the preseason of the 2021-22 season, which would ultimately keep him out the entire year. And not to speculate, but it's very likely that there was more going on than either party would like to lead on. And he just never was really the same after that. And it's really unfortunate. I hope he balls out overseas and gets another opportunity in the NBA, because he was a really good player for the Miami Heat. When you take a look at their additions, again, when you trade away one of your franchise cornerstones for the past several years, it's going to be a busy offseason. You get Jordan Poole, probably their best player in terms of acquisition right now. Jordan Poole, he had a down year last season. I am still super high on Jordan Poole, and I'll talk why in a second. I think he'll be a great fit here in Washington, where he just gets to focus on basketball. He doesn't have to answer, Draymond Green media questions twice a month. And the Wizards are just a significantly less covered team in the media than the Golden State Warriors. So I'm excited for Jordan Poole here in Washington. You also bring in Tyus Jones, who, if you look up the definition of solid in the dictionary, you would probably find Tyus Jones as a synonym to it, because he is really daggone solid. He's one of those guards kind of in the Dennis Schroeder mold, maybe a little bit better than Dennis Schroeder, where if he's your starting point guard, I have a little bit more reservations about it. But if he's your backup point guard, I am fully confident Tyus Jones is probably the best backup point guard in the NBA. He's a super, super solid guy, elite corner shooter, which we'll talk about later. high assist to turnover ratio guy, led the league in assist to turnover ratio the past 2 seasons. I'm super, super excited to get him here. And I think we can start to see a mold of what type of guards they want. Tyus Jones, Delon Wright, they have Monte Morris last season. You bring in Landry Shamet as well in the Chris Paul trade. Good shooter. He competes defensively. Not mad at it. And then you bring in Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari as well from Boston. Danilo Gallinari, I'm a little bit interested to see how he plays off the ACL. I was kind of excited actually to see him in Boston last season. But like I said, he tears ACL, missed all of last season. Luckily for him, he's not a guy that really, needed the lateral movement anyway. He's not a quick on his feet type of guy, but so I'm still fairly optimistic that he can provide some, microwavable scoring and pick and pop threat in this offense led by head coach Wes Unseld Jr. And then Mike Muscala, again, kind of a pick and pop big that is going to do his role, and he's a journeyman, if you will, around the NBA, been a bunch of different places. Seems like a good locker room guy as well. And then on draft night, the Wizards, they're going to enter a rebuild. They have to, get some upside. And the Wizards, quite frankly, might have gotten the two most biggest boom or bust prospects of this draft class. Bilal Coulibaly, I'm high on him. He was 11th on my board. But like I said, boom or bust. I think you look at some mocks or you look at some big boards, I've seen a couple where he was as high as like 8, maybe even 7. Or you'll see some where if you're super low on him, where he's high 20s, mid to high 20s. I had him at 11. I like him a ton. His swing trait is definitely the shooting. He's a little bit too erratic with the ball in his hands at times, but there is some legitimate playmaking upside. And we'll talk about his defense, which I love his defense already day one. And then I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but Tristan Vucevic, one of the two. Let me know in the comments if I'm pronouncing that poorly. But another guy that's a pick and pop threat that when you look at his 3-point mechanics and how he kind of likes to, set up his jumpers, it's kind of modern day Kevin Love-esque. I'm not going to lie to you. He has very legitimate defensive concerns though. So he's definitely a project. I don't know if I really want to see him playing year one. I think he's a G League stash. And they do have a good G League department. I know a couple of the coaches over there, or one of them at least. So I do like him a ton, but he's a G League stash. I think it's a project. But with that being said, let's take a look at this roster position by position and how they grade out for me throughout the NBA. And let's start off with this starting five. Let's start things off with the best player, and that is Kyle Kuzma, in my opinion, at least for right now. There are 2 candidates on this roster, in my opinion, that could overtake him for that. While I think it's unlikely because I'm a believer in Kuzma. I think he still has some room to grow. And I think arguably his best skill set right now is his driving ability. He averages 9.9 drives per 75 possessions, which really opens up his underrated playmaking game nicely. If you look at his percentage of drives leading to an assist off a pass out, he ranks in the 87th percentile at around 37%, which is just super valuable. And I think 30 out of 30 NBA teams would want a Kyle Kuzma because a lot of these NBA modern offenses, to some extent, one way or another, are derived off of some driving kick motion. Some teams do it a little bit differently, and some teams, their main principles are a little bit different, like the Golden State Warriors, for example. But to a certain extent, man, if you could get into the teeth of the defense and create a secondary read for another teammate, that is one of the more valuable skill sets that any NBA player can have. And Kyle Kuzma does that at a fairly good level, right? He finishes at the rim really nicely as well. 69% clip at the rim. Like I said, a very willing playmaker who just makes the right play more times than not in terms of his playmaking ability. Not going to be a guy that's ever going to average 7 to 10 assists, but as a connector piece, you feel really, really confident about Kyle Kuzma. He leaves me on the bones as a sub-creator, especially in isolation, where he's only 44.7% in terms of effective field goal percentage on true isolation attempts. So he just has to be more of an efficient shot maker. And I don't think he processes double teams all that well. That's where you'll see his worst turnovers. And I think Kuz would just have 3 or 4 possessions in a game where you just face palming and saying, "What the heck was that, Kuz?" And like I said, I think it leaves me on the bones. I think there is room for some growth with Kyle Kuzma to where I could say in a weaker Eastern Conference, he could be in a best case scenario an all star. I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world because I do think there is some upside. And kudos to the Wizards for keeping Kuzma around to where if whether they luck up in the draft and get a superstar, they trade for one or what have you, I think Kuzma could pair nicely next to another star. And then you have Jordan Poole, like I mentioned, who I do think is going to benefit from this situation where he gets to focus on basketball. I think right now his best offensive value is probably as an off-ball floor spacer and coming off of pin downs and stagger away screens and getting him in these two-man handoff situations, delay Chicago, things of that nature, where he gets to use his gravity as a shooter to set up drives and where I do think he's a good, not great playmaker. He averages 9.8 and 10 drives per 75 possessions the last 2 seasons, which is really, really good. The rim shot creation does a great out super, super well. But I do like Jordan Poole. Dare I say the arrow is trending upwards for Jordan Poole. And then Tyus Jones, like I mentioned, definition of solid, maybe a little bit more than solid. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm very interested in seeing him in a starter role. That's one of the reasons why he wanted to trade out of Memphis, where honestly he could have just started for 25 games and been on a contender in Memphis, but neither here nor there. But what Washington is getting is a super efficient corner shooter, 52.9 freaking percent on corner threes. The volume wasn't incredibly high, so ramp that up. And even if the number drops to like 45%, that is still really, really good from Tyus Jones. He's a really good playmaker. And obviously, like I mentioned at the top, does such a good job at taking care of the ball. He's going to make the right read more times than not. I do think he honestly leaves the meat on the bones, though, because he's not good at getting to the rim. He only takes 1.4 shot attempts at the rim per 75 possessions, which is in the 10th percentile. And in terms of finishing, he's not a good finisher either. He only finishes at a 54% clip. I want to say 54.67% clip at the rim, which is below average for NBA terms. So I like Tyus Jones. I think he's going to come in here nicely and be a nice replacement to what they had in Monte Morris, and dare I say maybe an upgrade towards Monte Morris. Your other upside ploy is Dedi Avdija, and I hope I pronounced that right as well. He has to become a better finisher. Only roughly a 58% finisher at the rim on half court attempts. And not a good three-point shooter either. He only shot 31.8% on catch-and-shoot three-point opportunities last season. The mechanics seem a little bit off at times, not super consistent. And it's kind of unfortunate because he can't really keep the defense honest because I do think he's a really good playmaker, especially off of ball screens. He has a ton of different passes he can make. He does force some every once in a while. He does force some bad passes, but I do believe in Dedi Avdija. And I like his upside. I don't know if you're going to get a superstar out of him, but I think you could get a really high quality starter and a guy that can be a two-way player. And I think he's already trending towards that. And again, another guy that, dare I say, is trending upwards. You have Daniel Gafford as well to round out this starting five, which is an all right starting five. It's just not a ton of, like upside day one. You're really banking on some of these guys to pan out long term. But with Daniel Gafford, truly one of the best screeners in the NBA right now. 5.6 screen assists per 75 possessions, 95th percentile. He was also in the 95th percentile in terms of total roll man impact per 75. So, again, one of the best screeners in the NBA, one of the best offensive rebounders in the NBA as well. Like, he truly is an elite offensive rebound. Every metric really favors him, and it pops out on film as well. How he positions his body, great guy in terms of putbacks as well. I really do like Daniel Gafford on the offensive and in terms of being a play finisher and a connector, and getting those offensive rebounds. He just does have Eddie creation, in my opinion. there's a complete lack of post game. So he's a guy that I think if you have a dominant pick and roll point guard or just on ball handler in general, perfect fit because of how dynamic he is as a screener. So I am excited to see Jordan Poole, Daniel Gafford 2-man game next season, but he's just leaving a ton on the table in terms of his offensive upside because he does have really any self creation. And then off the bench, you have DeLon Wright, who's been a journeyman, kind of struggled staying healthy at times, but another low turnover guy that's going to make a ton of the right play. All right, shooter. I do like DeLon Wright here. Corey Kispert, really freaking good shooter that will some games be the leading scorer. And I think he fits in really nicely to what Coach Wes Unseld Jr. wants to do in this kind of modernized blended 4-out, 5-out offense. And Corey Kispert, super smart player coming from Gonzaga. Landry Shamet, another guy that I'm honestly a little interested in seeing potential 2-man game with him and Daniel Gafford. I think he, again, another journeyman, started off at the Clippers, went to the Nets, played in Phoenix with Kevin Durant, with Chris Paul, Devin Booker first, and then Kevin Durant joins him, and then he gets shipped again. Really, really good shooter. I think him and Corey Kispert, Jordan Poole, I think they really did a lot to add more shooting to this roster. And then you got some upside plays. You got some upside plays on this roster. Let's start off with Bilal Coulibaly, who I do think the arrow is trending upwards for him. I'm a little interested to see how they actually use Bilal Coulibaly year one, and interested in seeing if they will use him in the G League at all. I think that Bilal Coulibaly is a freak athlete, and although the shot has a ton of work to be done in terms of just his mechanics and how he has to adjust his release to, NBA level speeds. But although that's definitely a negative in one of his swing traits, he's such a freaking good slasher to where if you can get him on backdoor cuts, 45 cuts, stampede cuts, which I think is becoming more popular in the NBA. Imagine a Jordan Poole, Daniel Gafford ball screen, and as Jordan Poole is coming off, you have Bilal Coulibaly, 6'8", just coming down there, lengthy dude, freak athlete at the rim that's going to play above the rim and finish through contact. That's really one of the red flags that a lot of these younger guys tend to have is they try to dodge contact. Think of like a Jalen Hood Shafino at times. It's the first guy that pops into my head. Maybe even a Nick Smith Jr., another guy that actually really did like in this draft cycle that try to avoid contact at the rim. And Bilal Coulibaly embraces it. And he's just a freak athlete, and he finishes super, super well at the rim. He has playmaking upside as well. So, yeah, the arrow is definitely trending upwards for Bilal Coulibaly. And lastly, I'll say on Bilal for now before we go to this defense. On draft night, I was a little bit weirded out by their process of trading up a pick to go get Bilal Coulibaly, where I felt like their general consensus was the Pacers were always going to take Jarris Walker at 7. But with the benefit of hindsight, I do recall the Jazz being super interested in Bilal Coulibaly. So, kudos for the Wizards to have that go-get-it attitude to go get their guy in the draft, and they do trade up to get Bilal Coulibaly. And I like the fit a ton, and I'll talk about that, especially when we get to this defense. Johnny Davis is a guy that I was super high on. I want to say I had a lottery grade on him. I bought into the upside. The shooting just hasn't come around at all, and the finishing ability hasn't come around at all. I'm still somewhat optimistic about Johnny Davis, but it's starting to get a little crowded here. I'm not going to lie to you, here in Washington, to the point where if either A, he better make an impression this year, or if a new head coach comes in next season, which I do think is a fairly, reasonable, outcome. I think it's possible that a new head coach comes in here. I don't know if they're going to like Johnny Davis a ton. So this is a major year 2 for Johnny Davis, and I hope he goes into camp and balls the heck out because I love Johnny Davis's tape last year. And then, like I said, you have Tristan Vucevic, I believe is the name. Pick and pop threat, has no real handle ability to where you could say this is a Kristaps Porzingis replacement, but I think he can be your modern 5-out big where you run some 5-out concepts, put him in the corner. He can knock down, catch and shoot looks. Uh, when they go to some of their unique actions that they run here in Washington, I think he can, be the 5-man when you go your delay actions and things of that nature. Fairly decent screener. Um, but a lot of his scoring action comes off of jumpers. I think he can fairly attack post mismatches all right, but he definitely has a lot of growth to show. And again, I think he's definitely going to be a G leaguer in his first year here. I do like him a ton. And could be a decent long-term upside play, but definitely a project in my eyes. And then, like I mentioned, you have Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari, two vets, kind of journeymen at this point in their careers. Danilo Gallinari coming off the ACL injury. Hopefully, he can get back to 100%. He doesn't need the, lateral quickness anyway. He doesn't really need the lateral quickness anyway, but so you're hoping he can still give you microwavable points and be a good spot up threat in this Wes Unseld Jr. offense. And then kind of similar to Mike Muscala, good pick and pop threat, fairly decent screener. And then you have Xavier Cooks, you have Ryan Rollins, Anthony Gill, some raw developmental type guys. Maybe you give a look at Anthony Gill if an injury happens this year. Xavier Cooks, kind of similar. I don't see a real pathway for Ryan Rollins to play this year. And then let's take a look at the defense. And let's start off with the best thing about this defense, and that is Deni Avdija. This Wizards team ranks in the tier 5 for me in terms of concerning defenses. So they have a long way to go. But Deni is the best thing about this defense. I mean, truthfully, man, like what he is able to do in terms of just his versatility, so freaking versatile, man. He spent 21% of the time, 21.4% of the time guarding point guards, 25.1% of the time guarding shooting guards, 22.6% of the time guarding small forwards, 18.9% of the time guarding power forwards, and 12% of the time guarding centers. Just freak versatility there, where he ranks in the 99th percentile per B-ball index in terms of defensive position versatility, which is the numbers that I spit out to you. And he ranks in the 96th percentile in terms of matchup difficulty, and in the 65th percentile in terms of defensive role versatility. So what you got is one of the most versatile defenders in the NBA, a wing stopper, if you will, and he's also going to get more times than not the most difficult assignment on the floor. And what's crazy is I think there's something to be desired with Deni Avdija, to where I think you could say there is still room to grow for him. I do think he gets into some foul trouble a ton, where he ranks in the 27th percentile in foul trouble percentage. I think he's a good, not great ball screen navigator. He doesn't always take the best angles on screens, and there were definitely some communication blunders that popped up on film as well. I think he's a really, really good off-ball screen navigator, however, which is a little bit interesting. I think he's actually a better off-ball screen navigator, better chaser than he is an on-ball screen navigator. He does such a great job at staying attached to the player's hips and getting skinny, coming across these pin downs or stagger screens, flare screens, whatever you want. Elevator, exit. I'm just throwing out screen names at this point. He can be a little too aggressive on closeouts, coming off these, off-ball screens, but that's easily something that can be fixed. And again, ties back into the foul trouble concern. He's a really good isolation defender. I think quicker guards can get by him, but he uses his length super, super well and still ultimately does an excellent job contesting. He has pretty solid recovery as well because of his length. He's a good defensive rebounder, around a little under 8 defensive rebounds per 75 possessions. He is this team's best defender by far. But unfortunately, you just can't have good defenses with a wing defender being your best defender, in my opinion. Daniel Gafford's a good defender. He definitely leaves some meat on the bones. He actually was a really fun, film evaluation study, if you will. I think he's a really good drop coverage big. He has some decent versatility as well as a mobile big in terms of, he can hedge. There was some switching. He's a solid post defender, but he is a weirdly bad defensive rebounder, which so heavily limits his defensive upside. He's not some insane rim protector either, which those two things negate his, true grade defensively. I think he's a good defender, but the fact that he's not a good rebounder, and it's not like you have great rebounders on this team. Like Kuz is fine, and we'll talk about in a sec. Denny's good, but if you don't pair him next to a 7-foot Kristaps Porzingis, I do think you have legitimate defensive rebounding concerns because you're big, who's going to be in a lot of these deep drop coverages or a little bit of everything, quite frankly, here in Washington, and he can't rebound. So that's something you definitely look to see Daniel Gafford improve upon. They did re-sign him, I want to say last summer. So that's definitely something that you hope that can be fixed. And then Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole. Start with Tyus, who I do think is the better defender between the two. He has pretty decent hands, 1.55 steals per 75 possession. Not bad. He's a competitor. When he's your worst defender, you feel fine, especially if you have Jaren Jackson Jr., Dylan Brooks behind you. But, if your backcourt's pairing him with Jordan Poole, that's a little too small because Jordan Poole is going to get picked on a ton. And I don't think Jordan Poole is the ultimate competitor defensively. But I like their front court, and that leads me to Kyle Kuzma, who I think is a slightly above average perimeter defender who does a decent job using his length to stay in front of opposing offensive players. Another guy that has some really good versatility, a good defensive rebounder, 6.9 defensive rebounds per 75, not bad. He has some really good instincts, actually, as a weak side help rim protector, where opposing teams or players shoot roughly 6.4% worse when Kyle Kuzma is there at the rim. So he's a sneaky good, help rim protector. And you pair him next to Daniel Gafford, you have a solid front court as well as Danny Avdija. One of this team's better strengths, honestly. And then off the bench, Bilal Coulibaly, holy cow. He is so freaking good, man. Again, he uses his length and size so well. He has the athleticism. He navigates screens well. He's going to be a good point of attack defender. If Bilal Coulibaly becomes a top 10 defender in the NBA, it would not surprise me. Top 10 perimeter defender would not surprise me whatsoever. I think day one, he's going to be the Wizards' probably second or third best on-ball perimeter defender. And I say second or third because DeLon Wright is pretty daggone good himself, to the point where every single defensive metric, it seems like, has him in the top 5 or top 10. You just keep seeing his name brought up consistently. Another decently versatile piece. And I think you see the vision for what Coach Wes Unseld Jr. wants here at Washington. He wants these defensive chess pieces that you throw a bunch of different tasks at him, whether it's Kuz, whether it's DeLon Wright, Denny, Daniel Gafford, Bilal Coulibaly. They have chess pieces defensively. And I think that's super, super valuable for, the long-term sustainability of this, franchise. So DeLon Wright's a good defensive player. Corey Kispert, he competes defensively. I don't think he's all that great. And then they also, like I said, Tristan Vucevic. I'll talk about him now. He is just super, super raw. He doesn't have the frame or the size to contest against, bigger wings or bigs at the rim. And he's not quick enough on his feet in terms of lateral quickness. I feel that he can stay in front of a guard out on the perimeter. Not a good rim protector. He has a lot of work to do, in my opinion, to really exceed this grade, if you will. And then Mike Muscala, Corey Kispert. Corey Kispert, I think, is a little bit better than he maybe gets credit for. He's not good by any means. Landry Shamet competes. Good off-ball chaser. Navigates screens fairly well. Again, another semi-versatile guy. And then Johnny Davis, again, you just really hope that he could take that next step heading into year 2. But that is the Washington Wizards roster. They do grade out with a 77.29 ranking, 29th for me in my power rankings. They are one spot ahead of the Portland Trailblazers, obviously. And in this group of teams that are definitely rebuilding, but similarly to the Portland Trailblazers, I have some optimism in terms of just them finally choosing a direction. And I think that's something to somewhat celebrate over, especially if you're a Wizards fan, when you haven't had that, in my opinion, in recent years. Let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses for this, Wizards team. I think strength number one, I think it is the perimeter shooting. I think Jordan Poole, I think Tyus Jones, especially on the corner. I think Kuz is a good shooter. He does a great out super well because of the bad shots he takes, but I do think he's a talented shooter. Corey Kispert, obviously, Mike Muscala, Danilo Gallinari, Landry Shaman, they got some good shooting here. I think the youth here is also really, really good as well. While if you look at the weaknesses, I don't think there's really long-term number one upside here. They got a ton of young talent here in Washington. Jordan Poole, who, as I mentioned earlier, like if you want to say the arrow should be trending up for Jordan Poole, I would not like combat that at all because I think Jordan Poole is a gym rat. And if you don't believe me, you don't go from G Leaguer to $100 million, third best player, fourth best player on a championship team without having a gym rat mentality. And I think Jordan Poole is gonna remind people that he can still play at that level. You still have Bilal Coulibaly, who I'm super high on. Denny Avdia. Kyle Kuzma could take some, improved steps as well. They have a bunch of youth here. And then the wing depth, I think Kuz, Corey Kispert, Bilal Coulibaly, Denny, uh, Patrick Baldwin had to even talk about on this pod. Gets a shout out. Danilo Gallinari, they have some good wing depth here in Washington to where they might be a team that makes a move at the deadline and get some picks back for one of these guys. Take a look at the weaknesses. I do think the lack of long-term number one upside is the biggest difference between them and the Portland Trailblazers in terms of my long-term optimism. I think the Blazers have Scoot Henderson and Anthony Simons, even I think has better long-term upside than everybody here except Jordan Poole. And I think simply because of that, I think I'm a little bit more concerned about the Wizards and why the fact that the Wizards have, decided to, commit to Bradley Beal for so long, honestly set their organization back a year or two, where if they either had let Bradley Beal walk or traded him or just not give him the no trade clause and then trade him sooner, you maybe get in the running for one of these high end upside talents. I think the defense is going to be a real concern. I think as much as I love Denny, he does have some room to get better at, which I think he can. And Daniel Gafford, I think he's a good defender, but if your second best defender in your starting five, and who knows how much Bilal truly plays, so I think you can even argue your second best defender on the team, who just so happens to be the one that's going to play closest to the rim most of the time, can't rebound off the shots that he does affect, that's a problem. And I think they're going to have to upgrade at some point. And then the guards are just not good enough. I think they're too small. I think you're going to really pick at them to the point where I just don't think this is a long-term championship backcourt. Who knows? They might even let Tyus Jones walk after this year. I believe he is in the final year of his contract. I do think the rim shot creation is somewhat of a concern as well. You look at that starting five alone, your best driver and finisher is Kyle Kuzma. He's probably your best finisher on the team. Bilal Coulibaly's in that category as well. But Jordan Poole does a great out well in terms of rim shot creation. Tyus Jones shot around 54% at the rim last season. Daniel Gafford, I mean, we're talking about rim shot creation, so he doesn't really apply here. Denny has to be a little bit better at the rim, like we mentioned. He finishes at the rim at a 58% clip, roughly. So there's just a ton of room for improvement amongst this roster, and I do think if you can create high quality looks by getting to the rim, your offense at times is really going to struggle. Let's take a look at some of the Vegas odds here, and then we'll wrap up and get out of here. So if you look at the Vegas odds, the Wizards have plus 100,000 championship odds, plus 50,000 Eastern Conference Finals championship odds, 20,000 division winner odds, and their over under is set at 24 and a half wins. I'm going to go with the under. This is the only team in the NBA that I'm really confident that they're not going to be good. The Portland Trailblazers, I think, and I don't recall if I said this in that episode. I hope I didn't, so I don't look like a complete idiot. But the Blazers, there's still, some question mark about whether or not Damian Lillard starts the season with them. And then even if he doesn't, there's a world where Scoot Henderson comes out guns blazing and is like Luka Doncic, Trae Young. Trae Young actually kind of started off pretty poorly, at least in terms of efficiency, but like where he comes out year one, you're like, that guy is him. And I think there is a world where that it happens. And then you pair that with Anthony Simons, I do think it's possible that they would exceed I don't know, they don't even have an over-under of 24 and a half wins. But if that was the case for Portland, I think there's a world where they could hit that. The Wizards, I'm fairly confident they're going to be a pretty bad team. And unfortunately for Wes Unseld Jr., unless like Bilal Coulibaly hits upside and you see great development, or Jordan Poole looks like a fringe all-star to the point where you're like, you know what? I like Wes Unseld. He's the guy for the future. I do think Wes Unseld's likely out of here after this upcoming season. Unfortunately, he just seems like a transition type of coach, unfortunately. But I do appreciate you all so much for tuning in with me into my deep dive into my number 29th ranked Washington Wizards. Please do leave a like and subscribe as we embark on this journey towards my number one ranked team in my 2023-2024 preseason power rankings. Thank you all so much. Until next time, stay safe and see ya.